Hello everyone, viewers. We need to talk about the witches, not the ones from fairy tales with green skin and pointy hats. We need to talk about the real ones, the hundreds of thousands of people, mostly women, who were hunted, tortured and burned across Europe for 3 solid centuries. The official story is one of mass hysteria, a dark, superstitious age where fear of the devil ran wild. But what if that's not the whole story? What if it was something colder, more calculated? What if I told you it was a plan, executed with chilling precision over 300 years, to eliminate a specific class of person, not witches, but wise women, and their crime wasn't consorting with demons, their crime was knowledge. Welcome to the greatest and most successful character assassination campaign in human history. To understand the crime, you first have to understand. Before the great cathedrals scraped the sky, before the printing press churned out Bibles by the thousands, your world is small, defined by the fields you plough and the forest at the edge of town. There is no doctor, no hospital. The nearest university is a world away, a place of myth where men in robes debate in a language you don't understand. But when your child is struck by a fever that won't break, when your cow goes dry, when you go to the woman on the edge of the village, the one whose garden is a chaotic tapestry of herbs you can't name, the cunning woman, the healer, the midwife, the wise woman. She is the village's doctor, pharmacist, therapist, and veterinarian all rolled into one. She understands the rhythms of the moon and the tides, the secrets of the plants that grow in the deep woods. She knows which root eases a cough, which poultice draws out infection, which tea brings on sleep, and which one can stop a life from beginning. Her knowledge wasn't learned from a book, it was passed down. Mother to daughter, for 1,000 years, a living library of folk wisdom, of empirical knowledge tested by generations. She holds the power of life and death in her hand, because her power is real, tangible, and it exists completely outside the 2 great pillars of medieval society, the church and the state. She is a 3rd pillar, a pillar of feminine power, rooted in the earth itself. And that, right there, was the problem. For a long time, this fragile balance held. The village priest might grumble about pagan superstitions, the local lord might be wary. It was unthinkable, until the world broke. In the mid-negative 1/4th century, a shadow fell over Europe. It came from the east, a phantom carried on the backs of rats and the breath of men, the Black Death, the great pestilence. Imagine a force so devastating it wipes out nearly half the population. It wasn't a war. You couldn't fight it with swords. It wasn't a famine. There was food. It was The old certainties crumbled. The prayers of the priests went unanswered. The herbs of the wise women for the first time were not enough. The scale of the catastrophe was biblical, apocalyptic, and in the ashes of this broken world a new kind of power began to grow. One that promised order in the face of chaos, a rigid, centralized, and exclusively male power structure embodied by the They looked out at the terrified, traumatized populace and saw an opportunity to rebuild society. Yes, but to rebuild it in their image, and to do that they had to eliminate any and all competition. They had a problem. The wise woman, she was still there. Her remedies might have failed against the plague, but in the aftermath she was the one people turned to. She was the one who helped communities rebuild, a living reminder of an older world, a world of local traditions, of female authority, of knowledge, rooted in nature, not in scripture or royal decree. She had to go. But how do you eliminate a figure so deeply embedded in the fabric of society? You can't just arrest her. She has done nothing wrong. You have to turn her into a monster. You have to make the people who rely on her fear her. You have to poison the well. It was a slow, creeping campaign of propaganda, a gradual shift in theology and law, orchestrated by some of the sharpest minds in Europe. The first step was to redefine her knowledge. Her healing arts, once seen as a gift, were now reframed. Where did this knowledge come from? Not from God, because the church was God's sole representative on earth. Not from classical learning, because she couldn't read Latin. Her herbal remedies were now demonic potions. Her ability to ease childbirth was a dark pact to steal the souls of unbaptized infants. Her connection with nature was twisted into obscene communion with animal familiars. It was a brilliant, insidious strategy. They took her greatest strength, her wisdom, and made it the very proof of her damnation. The second step was to create a legal. For centuries, the Church had been relatively lenient on witchcraft, often dismissing it as pagan foolishness. But now, that changed. Theologians and jurists began to argue that witchcraft was not mere superstition, but heresy, the greatest of all heresies. A direct rebellion against God, this elevated it from a local misdemeanor to a crime against the state, a form of treason against. It meant that the full power of the Inquisition, an institution perfected over centuries of hunting heretics, could be brought to bear against her. This wasn't about saving souls, it was about consolidating power. By controlling the definition of healing, the Church and the nascent medical universities could create a monopoly male, university-trained physicians who based their knowledge on ancient texts. Not by controlling the process of childbirth, they could control the family unit, the very foundation of society. Midwifery was one of the few respected and powerful roles available to women by demonizing it. They closed that door. The wise woman wasn't just a target. She was a symbol of an entire world they wanted to erase. A world where power was decentralized, knowledge was communal, and women held sway over the most. A tool so powerful it can turn neighbor against neighbor and tear communities apart. In 1487, that weapon was forged. It was a book. But calling it a book is like calling a guillotine a tool for haircutting. Its name was the Femelius Maleficarum Fici, the Hammer of Witches, written by two German inquisitors, Heinrich Kramer and Jacob Sprenger. It was, quite simply, one of the most evil, and it was a bestseller, second only to the Bible for over 200 years. It was a legal manual, a theological treatise, and a handbook on how to identify, prosecute, and destroy a witch, and it was aimed almost exclusively at women. The Femelius Fay is a masterpiece of misogyny. Its pages drip with a venomous hatred and fear of women. It asks, what else is woman but a foe to friendship, an inescapable punishment, a necessary evil, a natural temptation, a desirable calamity, a domestic danger, a delectable detriment, an evil of nature painted with fair colors? It argues that women are more carnal, more impressionable, more vengeful, and therefore naturally more susceptible to the devil's temptations. This wasn't just, it was the theological justification for the entire hunt. It gave educated, powerful men the intellectual permission they needed to persecute women, but the true genius of the Femelius Maleficarum Fay was in its procedural details. It was a step-by-step guide to terror. It laid out how to solicit accusations, often by promising leniency to those who named others. The book makes it clear that a witch will not confess without it. It provided a chillingly logical justification. Since the witch has made a pact with the devil will give her the power to resist pain. Therefore, the more she resists, the more it proves her guilt. It was a perfect, inescapable trap. The book described the signs of witchcraft, the devil's mark, a spot on the body insensitive to pain. A special pin would be used to prick the accused's body, searching for this spot, unscrupulous witch. Finders used retractable needles to fake the discovery. It described the swimming test, where the accused was bound and thrown into water. If she floated, the water, a pure element, was rejecting her, proving her guilt. If she sank and drowned, she was innocent. The Femelius Maleficarum Fee was not a dusty theological text, it was a playbook for murder. It gave inquisitors, judges, and local magistrates across Europe a ready-made script. It created a feedback loop of terror. An accusation led to torture. Torture led to a confession, and the confession, often including the names of other witches, led to more accusations. The weapon was in their hands, and they were ready to use it. And so the burning began, not all at once, but like embers catching in a dry forest. A trial here, an execution there. It started in the mountainous regions of Germany and Switzerland, areas where old folk traditions were still strong. In the late 15th and early 16th centuries, the fires began to climb the hillsides. But this was just the prelude. This was the peak, the great hunt, the burning times. It coincided with a period of immense social upheaval. The Reformation had shattered the unity of Christendom, plunging Europe into 100 years of religious warfare. climate change. The period known as the Little Ice Age brought crop failures and famine. Plague returned again and again in this world of chaos, fear, and uncertainty. And the Familius Maleficarum fee had given them one gift, wrapped and ready for the pyre. The architects of this new order watched as their plan unfolded with terrifying success. The virus of fear they had engineered was now spreading on its own. They just had to guide it. Let's travel to Trier in Germany in the 1580s. The region was ruled by a prince, Archbishop Johann von. He was a devout man, a product of the Counter-Reformation, obsessed with purifying his territory of all Protestant and demonic influence. Under his rule, Trier became a cauldron of paranoia. 1/3 of the population was accused. People from all walks of life were dragged to the torture chambers, but there was a pattern. The first to be targeted were the cunning women, the local healers. It consumed entire villages. In one, only 2 women were left alive. The inquisitors were meticulous. They kept records. One account describes the fate of a man named Dietrich Flade, a university-educated rector and judge who dared to be skeptical, who argued for more lenient sentences. His reward, he was accused of witchcraft himself. Under horrific torture, he confessed to anything. He admitted to attending a sabbat, to desecrating the host, to casting spells. He was strangled and burned in 1589. The message was clear: no one is safe. To question the hunt is to be a part of it. The machine had become self-perpetuating. The state paid for the trials, the wood, the executioner, and the property of the condemned. It was confiscated. Suddenly, informants, torturers, executioners, and the officials who grew rich off the assets of the dead. Now, let's cross the Channel to Scotland in the 1590s. The new king, James VI, was a scholar, a poet, and absolutely obsessed with witchcraft. His obsession began when he sailed to Denmark to marry his bride, Princess Anne. The return voyage was beset by terrible storms. The admiral of the Danish fleet blamed witchcraft. This planted a seed in James's mind back in Scotland. He personally oversaw the North Berwick witch trials. This was a turning point. It wasn't a local affair anymore. It had royal endorsement. The accused, mostly poor women from coastal villages, were subjected to the most extreme forms of torture. Sleep deprivation, crushing their feet in iron boots called the bootikins, using pillywinks or thumbscrews, they confessed. Of course, they told the king exactly what he wanted to hear, that they had gathered on the shore, summoned the storms, and conspired with the devil to kill him. They named names. One of the primary accused was a healer and midwife named Agnes Sampson. She initially refused to confess, but after being tortured with a witch's bridle, an iron muzzle with prongs that pierced the tongue and cheeks, and having a rope twisted around her head until blood spurted from her eyes, she broke. Her confession was spectacular. It implicated Francis Stuart, the Earl of Bothwell, the king's own cousin, and a political rival. Suddenly, the witch hunt wasn't just about purifying the land of evil. It was a political weapon, a way to eliminate enemies, to settle scores, to consolidate royal power. King James was so inspired by his success that he wrote his own book on the subject, Phenomenology Feti. It was his version of the Familius Maleficarum, fig a royal seal of approval on the slaughter. The Scottish hunts were unlike in many parts of Europe, where the Inquisition held some procedural sway. In Scotland, local courts and clergy could run their own trials with little oversight. The result was chaos and brutality. Women were the primary targets. Why? Think about the society. It was a fiercely patriarchal Calvinist culture. Women were seen as inherently weaker, but more than that, they were the keepers of the old Gaelic culture, the folk traditions, the stories and remedies that predated the new harsh Protestantism. The witch hunt was a tool of cultural cleansing. It was a war against the past, and women like Agnes Sampson were on the front lines. They didn't stand a chance. If you find this hidden history as fascinating and terrifying as I do, take a moment to hit. We're going deep into the stories that have been deliberately buried, and your support helps us keep digging. Now, let's go back to the heart of the fire. Let's journey to W. Würzburg. Another prince, bishopric in the heart of Germany in the 1620s. This is the 30 Years' War, a time of unimaginable horror, famine, and religious fanaticism. Here, the hunt reached an industrial scale. The Prince Bishop Philip Adolf von Ehrenberg wanted to make his territory a model of Catholic purity. He built a special witch prison, the Hexenhaus, complete with custom-designed torture chambers. His chancellor, a man named Ernst von Ehrenberg, oversaw a reign of terror that defies belief. The records from W. Fainsberg are chilling because of their They list the victims, the dates of their execution, and sometimes their supposed crimes. It wasn't just old women. The list includes children as young as 7, accused of having sex with demons. It includes respected councilmen, wealthy merchants, and noble ladies. It includes priests who doubted the trials. It includes a young girl whose only crime was being too beautiful. They were all burned. A letter from a W. Fainsberger. It's a terrifying glimpse into the madness, he writes. There are still 400 in the city, high and low, of every rank and sex, who are in prison. The Prince Bishop has 2 other councillors who are far more hot against the witches than he. They say that one should not hear the accused in their own defence. There are children of 3 and 4 years who are said to have had intercourse with the devil. I have seen children of 7 years, and What was happening here? It was social implosion. The plan, set in motion centuries before, had created a monster that was now devouring its own creators. The original target, the wise woman, was long gone. The first waves of the hunt had seen to that. Now the definition of witch had expanded to include anyone. Anyone who was different. Anyone who had a personal enemy. Anyone who was... The fear was so intense that people would preemptively accuse their own family members, hoping to save themselves. The social fabric of the community was not just torn, it was incinerated. They burned so many people in Fainsberg that the executioner complained the price of firewood was going up. Think about that for a second. The slaughter was affecting the local economy, and yet it continued. Why? Because to stop, it would mean the Prince Bishop, the judges, the theologians. They were not holy men fighting a cosmic war, but murderers and thieves. The machine had to keep running, fueled by an endless supply of bodies, because the alternative was too terrifying to contemplate. But even in the darkest night, there are glimmers of light. There were people who fought back, not with swords or magic, but one of the most remarkable was a Jesuit priest named Friedrich Spee. In the 1620s, he was assigned to be a confessor to condemned witches in W. Fainsberg and other German cities. His job was to hear their final confessions and prepare their souls for death. What he saw broke him. He listened day after day to men, women, and children telling him the same story. They were innocent. They would rather die than endure another moment of it. Spee realized he was not comforting the guilty. He was escorting the innocent to their deaths. He saw the entire system for what it was, a legal sham, a factory of lies designed to produce confessions. He saw how the legal presumptions were all stacked against the accused. Denial was seen as proof of the devil's aid. A calm demeanor was evidence of a hardened heart. There was no way out. Spee was horrified. He knew that speaking out would almost certainly get him arrested and burned as a witch sympathizer, but his conscience wouldn't let him stay silent. In 1631, he anonymously published a book called Faequatio Criminalis, fee or precautions for prosecutors. It was a devastating, logical demolition of the entire witch trial process. That would have been too radical. Instead, he attacked the process itself. He argued, with cold, hard logic, that a system based on anonymous accusations and confessions extracted under torture could not possibly produce truth. He wrote, "Often I have thought that the only reason we are not all wizards is due to the fact we have not been tortured." He laid out the paradoxes of the trials with searing clarity. If she is not afraid, she is guilty, for the devil gives her courage. If she defends herself, she is guilty, for it is the devil who speaks through her. If she gives up and dies, she is guilty, for the devil has broken her neck. His book was a bombshell. It was written in Latin, intended for an audience of academics, lawyers, and print. It didn't stop the trials overnight. The fires in Fredericksburg were already dying down, mainly because they were running out of people to burn, but Spee's work provided the intellectual ammunition for the opposition. He gave rational, courageous people the arguments they needed to push back against the tide of hysteria. He was one of the first to throw a lever that would, eventually, begin to dismantle the machine. So the horror eventually exhausted itself in places like Fredericksburg. The trials became so extreme and targeted such prominent citizens that the ruling elites finally realized the monster they had unleashed could devour them too. The end of the great religious wars, like the 30 Years' War, brought a measure of stability. Governments became stronger, more centralized, and began to standardize legal procedures, pushing out the chaotic. But the biggest factor was a fundamental shift in how people saw the world. The scientific revolution and the Enlightenment, a new generation of thinkers, philosophers, scientists, and jurists, began to champion reason, evidence, and skepticism over faith and superstition. The idea of a personal interventionist devil making pacts with old women began to seem, well, a bit. Courts began to demand actual evidence of a crime, not just a confession under torture. The English jurist Sir John Holt, in the late 17th century, is credited with overseeing the last witch trials in England. He acquitted every single one. The tide was turning. The last official execution for witchcraft in Europe took place in Switzerland in 1782. A woman named Anna G. Failde, but by then it was an anachronism, a throwback to a darker age. The fires had gone out. The 300-year plan had run its course, but was it successful? Yes, chillingly, terrifyingly successful. The wise woman was gone. An entire lineage of female knowledge, passed down for millennia, was broken. The art of herbalism was driven underground, replaced by a male-dominated medical profession that often disdained practical remedies in favor of theoretical and often harmful practices like bloodletting. The midwife, once a powerful community figure, was subjugated, her role reduced and regulated by male physicians. Her knowledge of contraception and women's health was the bond between women, the networks of support and shared wisdom, was shattered by the paranoia that the witch hunts deliberately fostered. Women were taught to distrust each other, to fear each other, and to compete under the gaze of patriarchal authority. And perhaps most profoundly, a whole way of seeing the world was lost, a world where the sacred was found in nature, where the divine had a feminine. This was replaced by a mechanistic, disenchanted worldview, where nature was something to be conquered and controlled, not respected and coexisted with. The witch hunt was a cultural scalpel used to cut out a part of the human spirit, and we have been living with the scar ever since. The architects of this plan achieved exactly what they set out to do. They consolidated power in the hands of the church and state. They broke the power of the village community and its traditions, replacing it with centralized authority. They didn't just kill hundreds of thousands of people, they re-engineered a society. They didn't just burn women, they burned a world. So what is the legacy of this 300-year war? It's not just in museums or history books, it's in the language we use. Calling a powerful woman a witch, it's in the suspicion that often falls on alternative medicine and natural healing. The ghost of the wise woman haunts us still. The campaign to discredit her was so successful that even today we think of the trials as being about spooky, supernatural evil. We forget that the vast majority of the victims were not Satanists or sorcerers. They were healers, midwives, widows, spinsters. They were women who lived on the margins, who didn't fit neatly into the new world being built around them. Their real crime was being women with power in a world that had decided women should have none, and the tools used against them, public shaming, the spreading of misinformation, turning communities against their own branding knowledge as dangerous. Are these tools really so unfamiliar to us today? The names of the inquisitors and the witch, but the methods they perfected, the strategies of fear and division they deployed, are still very much with us. The burning times may be over, but the war on certain kinds of knowledge and certain kinds of people never really ended. It just changed its name. It's a chilling reminder that the line between order and chaos, between civilization and barbarism, is terrifyingly thin, and that the most dangerous monsters are not... Alright, that is all for today's video. If you enjoyed it, please subscribe and give it a like to support us. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next one.